Hello everyone, Books with Banks back again today with another video, and today I'm here to rank all 9 of the different works that I've read in Diana Gabaldon's larger Outlander series universe. I should be clear, I have not read the 9 main novels. I've read 4 of those and 5 other shorter works that are also set in the same universe with similar characters and settings. But before I go too far, if you haven't already, it would mean a lot if you could please subscribe to my channel. Also, if you have any friends or family that might be interested in what I do here, if you could share my videos, that would help out a lot too. Thank you so much. I should also say that this is a spoiler-filled video, so there will be spoilers up through Book 4, Drums of Autumn, and through the first few Lord John stories and books there. Alright, so how I'm going to do this, I'll say the name of the story or the book, I'll say kind of where it falls in the series, and I'll also say what order I read this in. So yeah, without any further ado, in 9th place we have the first story in Lord John and the Hand of the Devils. This is a collection of 3 shorter stories, all dealing with the Lord John character, a side character. And this first story is called Lord John and the Hellfire Club. So I read this book. It was the 5th thing I had read overall, and other than my exposure to the Lord John character in the Stars adaptation of the series, and one brief meeting with him in the 2nd novel, Dragonfly and Amber, I didn't really know the character very well, and as short as this story is, I felt like I was kind of sad. I didn't feel like by the end of it I really knew him much better, and the story itself, it was fine, but I mean, it's really brief, just like 39 pages, and compared to the other things I've read by Diana Gabaldon, that is very short. Kind of an interesting mystery, secret societies, undercover people in a society get tangled up in a murder, or Lord John sort of investigating people in this secret society. This takes place, I believe it's in London, and it's alright, it just really doesn't do that much for me, so unfortunately I'll put Lord John and the Hellfire Club in 9th place. I also don't think anyone necessarily really needs to read this story. They reference the events here, and what Lord John accomplishes and what he goes through in the story. They reference that a little bit in some of his other work, or his other stories, but where I'm at least, it's not super important. So yeah, that's last place. Then in 8th place, the first thing I read overall was a novella in the middle of 7 Stones to Stand or Fall, this collection of novellas and short stories, and this one was Virgins. And now this is the story of Jamie and Ian when they were younger, so this takes place before Claire meets Jamie, and it's kind of chronologically one of the first stories in this universe, and it's Ian and Jamie working as mercenaries, kind of like caravan guards for hire, and them going through this sort of adventurous ordeal in France on this mission, delivering some Torah scrolls, and yeah, it's an interesting story. I think it does kind of shift every now and then from them just hanging out, being best buds, best bros and whatnot, to some kind of really dark stuff. Like there's a few scenes at like a brothel and those are very intense and kind of seem like a different tone than the rest of the story. But yeah, a fine place to start. Not my favorite story in this whole universe though, Virgins. And again, you can find that in 7 Stones to Stand or Fall, which, by the way, I should also mention, at the beginning of this book, this collection, has a really helpful kind of chronological reading order in the introduction. Yeah. And so I've, for the most part, been using this, but I do think where I'm at in the main series, I'm a little bit too excited to keep going with that. So I think I'll put all of the side stories, or most of them, on hold until I get caught up with the main books where I'm at right now. But yeah, definitely, if you want to bounce back and forth between, 1,000-page novels and a few shorter short stories, the introduction here gives a pretty good roadmap for how to do that without spoiling yourself or getting ahead in anyone's timeline. So yeah, Virgins comes in 8th place. Again, that was the first thing I read. Next is a novella, and this is the 4th thing that I read, and this also comes in the same collection. This is actually right after Virgins, or like it's printed in the book right after Virgins, and this one is called A Fugitive Green, and this story deals with characters that, from what I gather, they're even kind of side characters in Gabaldon's side Lord John stories, but it's all about kind of spy networks, this young woman being sent from France to kind of on a spy mission in London, London high society, with members, like other members of the John Grey family, but John Grey is not really around, and there's also some intrigue with our main character, with who her mother is, what happened to her mother. That kind of was a bit of a side thing that I didn't really care as much for. I did really like getting to see London. This was the 4th thing I read overall, and this was my first real look at Gabaldon writing London back in the 1700s. So I thought that was really exciting. And I think the mystery and the characters, even though they're only around for a short while, it is only a novella after all, I did find them pretty engaging. But there were a few passages and stretches of the story that I thought dragged on just a little bit too long for my tastes. Also, it doesn't seem like the most impactful story on the rest of the whole like Outlander verse, right? So yeah, I'll put that one in 7th place, A Fugitive Green. Next up, we have, and I would say this next shift goes from, yeah, I'm glad I read it because it's part of this universe and it fleshes things out a little more. That's what Hellfire Club, Virgins, and Fugitive Green, they all kind of fall into that category. But next up, these are stories that I legitimately really enjoy, and I have a lot of fun reading, and I would recommend any fans of the show or certain books in the series to read any of these as well. So next up, we return to this collection, Lord John and the Hand of the Devils, this collection of kind of shorter fiction about Lord John specifically, with him as the main character. And this is the 8th thing that I read overall, and it is the novella kind of tucked in the middle here called Lord John and the Succubus. And I really, really like when Gabaldon writes her characters in continental Europe. As you'll see, I'll talk about that when I get to some of the higher ranked books, some of the main series books on here. And this is in Lord John's kind of series of different stories and novels. This is one of the 3rd or 4th adventure that he goes on, or mystery that we see him exploring, and it takes place, it's on the France border with some Germanic states. And so yeah, there's war going on, and Lord John's sent here, and they're in a mansion, and there's all these mysterious rumors about a succubus, and everyone's terrified of this kind of fantastical creature coming in. And it's a lot of fun. I really like the setting. I like the mystery. I kind of like this sort of flirty side plot that's going on here with Lord John and another one of our characters. But yeah, I will say, between Hellfire Club, the first story here, and this one, there is a full novel about Lord John. So by this point, I was much more comfortable with who the character was, and I really got his motivations, and I really, really liked him by the point I got here. Again, this was the 8th thing that I have read in this series, or in this wider, broader series, out of 9 things. So yeah, I read this not too long ago, and I really liked Lord John and the Succubus, but even as much as I liked it, it still only comes in 6th place. There's still 5 works that I enjoyed more. And speaking of that other Lord John story, we have the first proper novel in what's right now a trilogy of 3 dedicated Lord John novels in the side series, and that's Lord John and the Private Matter, gives us a much better look into Lord John than any of the main series books, than the short fiction does. And of the mysteries I've read him like looking into and trying to solve and figure out, this is the most interesting. Also, I think Gabaldon uses this story to explore a really fascinating aspect of London, like urban culture and stuff, about and like sexuality in London in this time period, in the 1750s or so, late 1740s, early 1750s or so. I really liked this story, or this novel. I thought it was really compelling, pretty brief, pretty quick read, but there's also kind of some funny stuff, like John really doesn't want I think it's his niece or his cousin, marrying this one guy for like a really, like it's an important reason why you wouldn't want her to marry this guy, but it's kind of silly and awkward how he tries to navigate this really delicate, this really private matter, and yeah, so I really like this story. I thought it was a ton of fun. Great great examples in here of Gabaldon's ability to use the historical setting to explore fascinating aspects of historical London society that we might not always be thinking about. Good stuff. And yeah, I'm very comfortable this being kind of the 5th place, middle ranked book story of everything. But that's kind of all the side stuff I've read, because guess what? The top 4 are the 4 main novels that I've read of hers. So now the question is, which one of these did I like the least? My least favorite of the first 4 books so far, and again, I've loved the last few that I've talked about, the last few stories, so I love this book too. But my least favorite is probably book 3, Voyager. Now don't get me wrong, I think maybe the first 300 pages or so of this book might actually be my favorite stretch of the entire series, just because of how Gabaldon is able to handle this structurally difficult stretch of time, where our main protagonists, our main love interests, Jamie and Claire, they're apart for this time, and we're kind of catching up through their 20 years apart, building up towards their eventual reuniting. And I really like that part. From what I've seen kind of online and seen other reviews talk about, I think that actually might be a big part that other people don't like about this book. Just the fact that Jamie and Claire aren't together and aren't able to play off of each other. But I found it really compelling. And yeah, I just breezed through the first 300 pages or so. Then things kind of slow down when Claire gets back to Jamie, because I think it makes sense. It's all very like reasonable, but they're different people now. Basically, they still have a lot of the characteristics, and they still have the love for each other from 20 years before. But they are different people, and it's kind of uncomfortable them having to get used to who they've become and the things that they've been through while they've been apart. And that stretch. Again, while I understand why that's happening, and it is very realistic, I think, for something like that to happen, it's just not the most fun to read. I also, the stuff on the boats going across the Atlantic, that gets a little slow to me. And then by the time that we get to the island hopping in Jamaica, there do seem to be a good number of kind of convenient, oh, well, it just so happens that this ship is at this island, and the ship had this crew, and oh, Lord John's here as well. Okay, and then it just seemed like it seemed like the Caribbean was such a small place where everyone was just bouncing into everyone so easily all the time. Whereas I feel like realistically, it would have been a little bit more difficult for these characters to be getting around in that setting. Kind of felt a little bit rushed in the end there, which is kind of ridiculous to say any part of these books is rushed, because this is almost 1,100 pages. But yeah, I really... I understand I've probably been saying a lot of negatives about this. I really do like this book, though. Like, I like her dealing with typhoid fever on the boats. I love the introduction of young Ian here, even though he starts to shine in later book, and we'll get there. But yeah, just for some of those other reasons, I think this one follows just a little bit lower than the other three so far. So yeah, Voyager, book 3 of the main series. The seventh story that I read overall comes in 4th place. In 3rd place, the second thing I read overall, the first novel of the main series, Outlander. This book's amazing. I mean, it's such a beautiful romance, adventure, kind of historical fiction epic, and I love this book. I'm not sure I can say too much about it that hasn't already been said. I do want to kind of emphasize one of my favorite things about this book, though, is that we start the book. Claire comes back and goes back into time. One of the first things she does is she heals Jamie's shoulder. She helps him, right? Kind of a smaller thing. Then over the course of the book, there's several moments where Claire, desperate to get back home, desperate to make friends, to kind of fit in and figure out a way of life in the past, she keeps getting into all of these tight spots, and Jamie keeps having to kind of show up and rescue her and help her out. But then the book doesn't end on any one of those moments where Jamie's rescuing her. The book actually ends on the most dramatic thing where Jamie's captured and tortured and raped, and all of these horrible, horrible things happen to him. And Claire, again, where she started, coming back in time, didn't know anything or anyone, and she heals Jamie. At the end, we return to that with a much more like higher stakes kind of scenario, and she's leading Jamie's men, and she's leading Jamie's men, and not only are they physically saving him from the location he's being held in, but then there's still like 100 or so pages at the end of the book where she has to kind of rescue his sanity and kind of save their relationship. And yeah, so for all of those reasons, a great story. I'm not sure if it's allergies or if I just like coughing or something, but maybe it is just thinking about the story that's getting me a little bit choked up, especially those last several chapters here. So yeah, Outlander, easily my 3rd favorite of the series. I'd say easily at least my 3rd favorite of the series, and I can totally understand why it's still a lot of people's favorite. Yeah. Then in 2nd place, we get to my most recent read, the 9th book I read, book 4 of the main series, Drums of Autumn. Now, I've already posted a kind of halfway through this book review on my channel, and so I'll kind of give closing thoughts on that when I'm talking about, like this entry here now in my ranking. 2nd place, I must have really loved it, right? And I did. I thought it was a wonderful book. Even in the show, this is one of the points in the series where it starts to shift, or the focus starts to shift from Scotland adventuring, European kind of stuff. Even though Voyager the book 3 got us to the New World, this is the first book that sees our characters trying to settle down and make a life for themselves in the New World. Now, someone just describing this series to me before I started watching or reading it, I personally studied a lot more European history than U.S. history, and so, or I was more interested in European history, at least, because every school everywhere makes you take like 1 or 2 semesters of U.S. That's a topic for a different thing. Anyway, if someone had told me, oh yeah, the series shifts to kind of like building up to the American Revolution after the Jacobite rebellion stuff is all done, I would have gone, oh really? That just doesn't interest me as much. But the way that Gabaldon writes about it, even in this book where the revolution is like 6 or 7 years off, or 6 or 7 years down the road, you can still see that tension there. The way she writes about the horrible and kind of like the horrible, tense, and racist relationship from the European and English colonists with the Native Americans. I think she captures some of that stuff really well. She sprinkles in representations of slavery and how horrible that was, but how everyone just thought of them as servants, staff, that sort of thing. Horribly thought about it, just in such kind of a, I don't know, like a whatever sort of way. Yeah, all of these kind of heavier topics are sprinkled in here, and I think she handles them for the most part with a lot of grace and a lot of respect. And it's pretty clear to me, it seems like she did a ton of research, especially with this book, in really painting the most accurate picture of colonial North Carolina that she could possibly make. And I think it's really, really rich in detail there. Also, this book, we kind of start splitting our attention from Jamie and Claire back in the 1700s with Bree and Roger researching and looking into if Jamie and Claire found happiness, settled down anywhere, what their lives were like. Roger and Bree in the 1970s or 1960s, 1970s, they're doing their research trying to figure out if Bree's mother, Claire, found Jamie and if they wound up happy together. And then through a series of miscommunications and kind of frustrating events, honestly, Bree and Roger both wind up going back in time too. And so I couldn't really talk about this in my first half review of this because they hadn't really gone back in time at that point yet. But yeah, then the second half of this book is basically now that we've seen how Jamie and Claire are getting settled in the new world, now we get to see Roger and Bree, or Bree going back, Roger following her, their adventures across the Atlantic, their adventures in the colonies, and the horrible things that happen to them there, and then horrible, really horrible miscommunications and misunderstandings that happen that lead to some of the more dramatic things in the end of the book. And it is almost comical, almost like sitcom level miscommunication that leads characters to be basically like imprisoned for months, for the majority of a year. But then I actually think it played a little better in the book than it does in the show. I'm not exactly sure why I liked it better in the book than the show. Again, I'm talking about this. There's one big miscommunication thing. I guess I did say spoilers, so I can just say it's that Jamie and Ian and Lizzie think it was Roger who assaulted Bree, and so they beat him up and sell him to the Mohawk. Yeah, and just the way that all plays out in the book, I enjoyed being in certain characters' heads more in this book than just watching them on the show. And yeah, I really liked how Gabaldon wrote the excitement of that whole situation. I also really, really like some of my favorite parts of this story were near the end. Bree living with Aunt Jocasta, with Jamie's Aunt Jocasta, and Bree living there while she's pregnant, and her conversations with John Gray, and her conversations with some of the slaves there, and yeah, that's easily one of my favorite parts of this book. So yeah, halfway through, I wasn't sure if it would make that second place spot. I was thinking it might. After reading that second half, again, where the Roger and Bree storyline really picks up, it's an easy second place. But still, and I'm not sure if this is really going to change anytime soon, my favorite book in the series is still Book 2, Dragonfly and Amber. I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the Lord John stuff that I loved that there was the succubus story where they're in continental Europe, and I really love when Gabaldon goes to any settings over there. Here they're in Paris for the majority, or for the first half, at least half or so of this story, and I love this section. Also, when they get back to Scotland, I feel like we get kind of the real sequel climax, like violent, exciting, tragic kind of continuation and also conclusion of a lot of the background political story that was set up in book 1. So this is kind of the best of both worlds. Like, she changes settings to a setting that I enjoy more than what we had in book one. And so I love everything going on there. And then when we return to the book one setting of Scotland, I think all of that stuff is more exciting than what we were doing in Scotland in book one. Even though that book's amazing, like I said, I got third place. But yeah, still, I think this book is basically like, it's two kind of 500-page novels or so, one in Paris, one back in Scotland, and I think it's wonderful, and I love how she plays around in this book, I think more than any of the others, with this question of, if we know what's going to happen, what can we do to change the past? How can we influence things? And sort of this really dark, twisted, upsetting idea of, oh no, us trying to stop these people, sacrificing their lives for nothing in the Jacobite Rising. What if without our meddling, what if they would have actually won? What if we were always here? What if whatever happened just happened, right? And we always were fated to be here at this time. We're the reason. Our meddling is the reason that the rebellion failed. And I also love how these questions are never just outright answered. There's no info dump. There's nothing like that. There's theories and there's guesswork. But ultimately, at the end, it's brought back down to that human level of, okay, even if the Jacobite Rebellion's doomed to fail again, Claire, you have to go back because you're pregnant with our child. And so that whole kind of tease of Bree's child, Bree and Jamie's child, is such a fascinating, I guess, component of this book, where the story is actually, I just mentioned how it's like split between Paris first half, Scotland second half. Really, there's these two kind of like 50 or 60 or so page portions at the beginning and the end, these bookends that are set in the 1960s after Claire's 1900s husband Frank has passed away. She and her daughter Brianna show back up in Scotland, and they're talking with a young man named Roger Wakefield, and he's helping them research and look into whether or not Jamie survived the Battle of Culloden or not. They also run into Gillian, who winds up being Gayless, who we knew from book one, and we see exactly what her time travel thing was all about, and that kind of darker story. But so we know that Claire has a daughter, Bree, and we know at the end of last book she was pregnant with Jamie's child, and then we're trying to think about the timeline, how things are going in Paris, and I think just how Gabaldon is playing around with our expectations and our curiosity about who is this child, whose child is she? Is she Frank's? Is she Jamie's? And I think she plays around with that really well, and so when we get to that climax of Jamie sending her back through the stones, it's all the more emotional, and we totally understand why. Also, everything with the miscarriage in the middle of the book is really, really tragic, and I think Gabaldon writes about it really delicately and really well. I also really like the return of Blackjack Randall. As much as I enjoy Book 4, Drums of Autumn, and I do enjoy Voyager as well, Book 3, I still think I haven't read a better villain than Blackjack Randall yet in this series, and him returning here, but sort of with this weird begging for sympathy. There's a sort of forced sympathy angle with Frank where we care about Alex and Mary, and I'm not sure if this is like a hot take or an unpopular opinion or not, but I absolutely love what Gabaldon does with Alex and Mary and Frank's lineage and everything like that. I think that is so creative, and I mean, I know I was kind of complaining about a lot of the convenience at the end of the island hopping stuff in Book 3, Voyager, but this is kind of a convenient way to keep us guessing about time travel in this one and what can be changed or not. And so, yeah, just the fact that, this whole Jamie stabs Blackjack Randall in the crotch, and so now he can't have kids, and so Claire's furious, of course, because you can't have or because Frank might never be born in the future. What does that mean for the future? And she doesn't want to doom Frank to not existing. And then all this interesting stuff with Mary and Alex being Blackjack's brother, and Alex is sick and dying, but Mary's pregnant, and she needs a husband, and she knows from the family tree charts that Mary is destined to marry Blackjack Randall. Just the way that whole thing works out, I thought that was so brilliant, so well done. Also, really great stuff wrapping up the Duke of Sandringham kind of intrigue. Really enjoyed that. And I just love seeing Versailles, and I love seeing the decadence and the just how, what's the word? Not opulent, or just how like ostentatious and all of this stuff. I just love seeing the decadence of higher class kind of lifestyle in Paris in this time. Wonderful book. It's devastating, absolutely devastating. So, if people want a much more optimistic, kind of hopeful story or chapter in the lives of Jamie and Claire, this is not the one for you. But I really, really liked how that, like, this kind of doomed to fail kind of idea of this book. Again, really tragic, but really, really powerful stuff. Still my favorite book in the series. One of my favorite seasons of the show is season 2 that adapts this book. I'm not sure that that's really likely to change. So there you have it. That's my ranking of all 9 things I've read by Diana Gabaldon in this Outlander universe. So far, I'm really excited to continue on with book 5 of The Fiery Cross. I'll probably start that sometime later this year. Thank you all so much for watching. Please let me know down below what are your favorite novels, or what are your favorite Outlander novels and Outlander side stories, side novels, and all that fun stuff. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.